Good evening, everyone. I'm Liza Stearns, Director of Visitor Engagement, Education, and the Arts with the National Parks of Boston. On behalf of the National Park Service and Boston Harbor Now, I'd like to welcome you to Women of the Waterfront, the second installment of our annual Revolutionary Harbor Lecture Series. This year, Revolutionary Harbor is presented as part of the commemoration of the Boston Harbor Island's 25th anniversary as a national park and 50th anniversary as a state park. If you want to learn more about anniversary programs, please visit our website at www.bostonharborislands.org. You can also find a link to that in the chat. This evening's panel discussion promises to be thought-provoking and generative. It's also timely. It's March, Women's History Month, and women tonight are front and center. The Boston waterfront has always been home to strong, compassionate, influential, and resilient women. For thousands of years, women of the Massachusetts tribe, whose ancestral territory includes the Boston Harbor Islands and waterfront, have played and continue to play defining roles in the stewardship of this land and people. In the early years of the 20th century, women like Annie McWilliams, who valued education so much that she rode across the harbor every day to teach youth who lived on the islands. And when World War II broke out and Boston's largely male workforce went off to war, women like Anita DeCastro, Dorothy Ruiz, and Mildred Isaacs stepped in to work the machines of Boston Naval Shipyard. Though these women's interests, identities, responsibilities, and ways of living and being have differed, they have each shared in a commitment to the health and wellness of waterfront life and community. The same can be said for our panelists today, women in public service who are breaking barriers and leading their organizations through the upheavals of climate change and a global pandemic while reimagining the future of the harbor and the people whose lives it touches. Panelists, I'd love for you to join me on the screen. With us tonight are Captain Kailie Benson, who is the commander of U.S. Coast Guard Sector Boston, which is headquartered on the water in Boston's North End. In this role, Captain Benson oversees all Coast Guard missions from the Massachusetts-New Hampshire state border, south to Manamet Point and Plymouth, and extending 200 nautical miles offshore. Captain Benson is the recipient of 2 Meritorious Service Medals, Joint Service and Coast Guard Commendation Medals, Joint Service and Coast Guard Achievement Medals, and was recognized with the Marine Safety Insignia for professional accomplishment in the Marine Safety Program. Commander Billie J Farrell, commanding officer of the USS Constitution, the nation's ship of state and berthed in Charlestown Navy Yard, is also with us. Commander Farrell is the first woman to command USS Constitution in the ship's 225-year history. Her awards include 3 Meritorious Service Medals, 4 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, and 3 Meritorious Unit Commendation Medals. We also have tonight Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, who is Boston's Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space, and is also founder of the New Roots AME Church in Dorchester. Reverend White-Hammond is a fellow with the Green Justice Coalition and has extensive experience in public speaking and community outreach related specifically to social and environmental justice. Our final panelist tonight is Lisa Wieland, Chief Executive Officer of Massport. Lisa is the recipient of the 2019 Pinnacle Award from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. She was appointed by Secretary Elaine Chao as the chair of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Maritime Transportation System National Advisory Committee, and she serves as an ex officio trustee on Boston Harbor Now's board. I'd now like to also introduce you to our moderator for the evening, Kathy Abbott, President and CEO of our partner nonprofit, Boston Harbor Now. In this role, Kathy has come full circle since beginning her career in college as a park ranger on the Boston Harbor Islands. She has extensive experience in the public and nonprofit sectors, including helping to create the first of its kind national park in Boston Harbor, starting up the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, increasing funding for public parks throughout the state, and managing the largest private park system in Massachusetts. Kathy has worked locally and globally and volunteered nationally to advance the interests of urban parks as the co-chair of the City Parks Alliance, and more recently on the board of the National Recreation and Parks Association. Welcome, Kathy. Wow, what a night. And just a couple of housekeeping items before I bow out and let the conversation you've been waiting for begin. First, we are going to save all audience questions until the end of the presentation, but please, throughout the presentation, feel free to type your questions into the Q&A button using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. It's important to note that tonight, the chat function will not enable you to talk with each other, just with panelists and the hosts. If you'd like to share something with hosts or panelists, feel free to do so, but please, please use the Q&A button to pass along any questions that you'd really like to see brought into this conversation. For those interested in closed captioning, you can use the CC button at the bottom of your screen to turn closed captions either on or off. Lastly, while we get started, we'd love to know where you are joining us from. So please feel free to drop your city and state into the chat. And at that, I'm going to leave it over to you, Kathy, to take it away.
Thank you, Liza. And everybody ready to go to work now and have some fun? We're hoping this will be a little bit conversational. It's a little tough in this format, but here we go. I'm going to start with some general questions and then we'll get into some specifics for each of the panelists. So Boston Harbor is at a turning point, whether it's tackling the challenges of climate change and the development that's occurring all around our shores, or reframing the ways in which we consider and share the layered history of the islands, or restoring the port and the cruise port to their pre-pandemic levels. I'd like each of you to address what contributions do you see yourself and or your agency or organization making to the harbor at this time? Who wants to kick it off? Captain Kailie.
Great, thanks for the question, Kathy. Great question. I think what I would say to that is our commitment as Team Coast Guard here in Massachusetts, and specifically your Boston Harbor team, our commitment is to continue to bring our very best. I really kind of consider us to be guardians of the maritime transportation system. It's woven into the majority of our mission sets. The marine transportation system, as probably many of you know, is about a $5.5 trillion enterprise for the United States, which constitutes about 25% of our gross domestic product. So that's nationally, and with that, Boston Harbor and Weymouth Fore River are critical hubs in that system. So our job as the Coast Guard, one of the many jobs that we perform for the American public, is to screen ships that are arriving and departing. We screen them for a variety of things, not the least of which are compliance with environmental regulations, laws and regulations, safety and security laws and regulations as well. We regulate waterfront facilities that receive those ships for the very same laws and regulations. We also respond to people and vessels in distress. That's a really important role that we play here in the harbor specifically and along the coast. We don't do it alone, of course. We do it with our partners at the state and local level as well. We also pay very close attention to the waterway in general, the channels specifically. Obviously, those are like highways, or they're like rail lines, or they're like the air system. You can't do commerce without them. And so we pay very close attention to all of those facets. The other thing we do is we really practice every day to plan, prepare, hone our skills, sharpen the saw in order to be ready for crisis when it happens, and to play our role in preventing and mitigating the outcomes of crisis where that's possible.
Terrific. Thank you. It's a long list. Reverend Mariama, what are we doing at the city?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of things. I mean, some of it is that we have the benefit of working in partnership with a number of the folks that you see on this call, just staying in communication, trying to figure out how the water doesn't pay attention to the fact of who owns what piece and who's in charge of what parcel. And so making sure that we're in good communication is an important part. We also are looking a lot at the question of how do we prepare for sea level rise? Boston has 47 miles of coastline, and so we really have to pay attention to what is already happening and in terms of flooding. There are a number of places where we're already seeing some of those challenges when we have major storms. I live in Dorchester, not too far from Castle Island and Carson Beach, and that's where we sort of touch the harbor, and it's one of the places that we see flooding, as well as in East Boston and parts of downtown, and so a lot of what we're trying to do is pay attention not just to what is currently, but also what's coming, and really think about how we can work cooperatively. So also, we also do a lot of work with DCR that has control of quite a bit of our coastline, to just make sure that we can stay on the same page and we're prepared for residents to experience the beauty of the harbor and to prepare for the fact that there are also some risks associated with being so close to the water. The city's really trying to help to prepare for. So yeah, I would say that's one of the big things. And I, as a Dorchester resident, I also live not too far from where the Neponset River makes its way in. And I think, I don't know if a lot of folks saw that the EPA designated the Neponset River as a Superfund site. And so it's exciting because at this point, the river's clean enough for people to recreate, but there are definitely real challenges in terms of some of the sediment in that river. And we'd like to get that riverway up to a much higher level of cleanliness. So we're also working with the City of Milton. So there's a lot of ways in which the City of Boston is in relationship. We're also working on wetlands regulations, some of which are pretty close to our harbor and some of the surrounding areas. So we're paying attention in a lot of ways, and mostly thinking about it from a climate change perspective, but also how do we make sure that residents can enjoy and fall in love with and interact with the waterfront, because it's really a blessing. And we need to prepare for the realities we are already facing, and unfortunately, even more to come down the line.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend. Commander Billie Farrell.
Hi, well, thanks so much for having me. So I think for the most part, I'm really looking forward to continuing the relationship that has been existent between USS Constitution, the Navy, and the City of Boston. We're a little bit different in the fact that we rotate through here on assignment, and completely change the crew every few years. But right now, really looking forward to the momentum that the ship has with all the publicity and stuff since I took command. And using that, the ship is turning 225 later this year. So we're planning a bunch of great events to hopefully continue that positive support and kind of national spotlight on the ship. We've had over 10,000 visitors just this month. And so we're getting back to some of those numbers that we've seen, kind of pre-COVID days. And so just really focusing on that. And again, continue to celebrate the ship and the city that she was built in as we get her to that milestone.
Thank you, Billie. And Lisa, over at Massport.
Thanks, Kathy, and thank you for having me here today. Thank you to the National Park Service. I think one of the things that we look forward to this year is obviously celebrating the dual park anniversaries. And Commander Farrell, I forgot that you have the 225th to celebrate too. So I think we're all excited about that. And certainly we feel privileged and honored to be a part of the coalition that is actively planning some of the celebrations later this year. You know, I think for us, obviously, we have been working on the revitalization of the Port of Boston for a number of years, and all the critical infrastructure investments that we've made are in place. The pandemic has obviously brought an unprecedented crisis to us across the board, and some of our port assets are equally affected. And so we're really anticipating a return to cruising this year. You know, cruise is an important part of the travel and tour industry here in the city of Boston. And so we're looking forward to bringing visitors back to our city. And in addition, we're investing in green space and also new port facilities that will support the burgeoning wind industry. So a lot of interesting things to look forward to as we continue to move forward with our port strategy.
Thank you, Lisa. Before I shift gears entirely, a number of you mentioned things that you are doing with each other. I just want to make sure that we didn't leave out anything that somebody wanted to make sure they brought up that you're doing. I think the amount of collaboration that happens among all of us and many others, probably many of the people on this call, is really critical to the success of what we're each involved in. But did anybody have any other collaborations that they wanted to highlight before I move on to Women's History Month and another theme of this conversation?
Kathy, if I may, I just want to call out, you know, lots of people recognize the Coast Guard, but the Coast Guard is really critical to the safety and security of our facilities. And I think with everything that's happening in Europe right now, I think appreciating those members of the Coast Guard who are a part of that and protect this important vital asset each and every day, and not just here, but across the country. It's important to acknowledge that important role they play. So, Captain, thank you to you and your team for all that you do. And we work closely with them. As she said, she regulates our facilities. So she is a key partner of ours in everything we do here in the harbor.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any other collaborations you want to highlight before we move on? Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So we're hosting this panel as part of Women's History Month, and recognizing that much of recorded maritime history and even recent leadership roles in your various organizations have all been held by men. So this is a new wave. I'd love to have each of you talk a little bit about what you think you bring to your role that may be unique to being a woman, and talk about any particular pressures you may have felt on the way up. And any particular support that you may have felt that you got during that experience. I think we'll start with Mariama this time.
Yeah. So it's an interesting question as you asked. I'd say a few things. I mean, I think that far too often, maybe not always it's a good thing, is that we as women find ourselves multitasking. Trying to hold a few balls in the air at the same time. And my husband always critiques this. He says, nobody truly multitasks. It just means that you everything halfway. But, you know, I think that from my perspective, so particularly in my role, I do joke with people, but it is true that I oversee everything from the archaeology department to the animal care and control. So my, because it's energy, environment, and open space, I have cemeteries, I have historic preservation. I've got a lot of things going on in my cabinet. And for me, it's something that I think I try to bring excitement to learning new things and doing new things, but also trying to sort of juggle a few different things. I think I also, you know, we are trying to embed equity in everything we do, in the way that we make decisions. And I think as a woman, and particularly as a Black woman, I know what it is to be excluded. I know what it is to feel like you have to elbow your way in a little bit to be heard, or to say something and be dismissed, and then have two people later say basically the same thing you just said, and people go, yeah, we should think about that. So I think there's some experiences I've had as a woman, and particularly as a woman in leadership, that I actually try to bring to my thinking about how we engage with community members, and how we really think about not creating systems that are focused on the folks that are likely to show up, that are already are being served well, but really thinking about how can we design a system that brings people in who are used to not being heard and who are used to not being consulted, or to have meetings at times that they can't make it. And so we've been trying to do that work. And I think, you know, a lot of that has to do with sort of my own perspective of having that happen to me, and trying to make sure that it doesn't have to happen to other people in the way that I lead.
Thank you. Commander Farrell.
So I think for the Navy, the biggest thing here is the first woman, if any of you have seen it, there's a picture of me standing next to USS Constitution in 1998. It's been floating around the media, but when I came here on a family vacation, it's a sophomore in high school, we just happened to take a picture of me standing next to the ship. But it's really cool because that's the same year a woman assumed command of a combatant ship in the Navy for the first time. And so, you know, for me, women have been in this role for a really long time, but for the Navy, so much of what we do is in the background, you know, the deployments and the overseas missions. And a lot of time the mission comes across, but not who the commander is. And so it's nice to just kind of be the person that gets to represent those women today. There are 21 women in command of ships in the Navy right now across the world. And so I'm just privileged enough to be the person to represent them on top of the 70,000 active duty women in the Navy, and to get to share their stories and all the amazing things they do. And to tie that into USS Constitution it is amazing. And part of that, it really is because we're much more accessible. You can't walk up to a Navy pier and say, I want a tour of an aircraft carrier, but you can absolutely walk up to us and say, I want a tour and I want to talk to a sailor. And especially now that a third of my crew are women, it just, you know, now makes it more visible for people to understand that anything is possible within the Navy, and that you can have any career that you set your sights on with hard work and dedication.
That's great. Thank you. It's terrific. You get a third. I think a lot of us have a lot of women on our teams, and there are probably a lot of women on this call that are very active in the harbor. Are you there, Lise?
I'm sorry, Kathy, you were breaking up. Are you calling on me?
Yep. Yes. Sorry,
Okay.
I muted myself. Yes, I'm calling on you, Lise.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, I think when I reflect on this, you know, throughout my career, I've been quite fortunate to have a number of mentors and people who supported my career journey, no matter where I was, but they tended to be men. And so I think, you know, as I'm in this role now, one of the things that I try to do is you know, mentor younger women in their career. I can offer a bit of a shared experience, which is something that, you know, many of us didn't have as we were coming up through the ranks. And so really trying to help them wherever they are on that career journey, helping them understand that, you know, career paths are not linear. They're oftentimes this weaving road that you didn't anticipate. You can't plan it. But I think when we're all young, we think, no, we're going to do this and then this and then this. And as life moves on, we realize, no. You got to say yes to the opportunities that are before you. And so, you know, I try to be able to share some of that with them. And I'm quite fortunate to have a number of fabulous young women on our team.
Great, thank you. And Captain Benson.
Yes, I think I agree wholeheartedly with Lisa. I would probably have said something very similar to that, in that most of my mentors through my 29 years in the Coast Guard have been male. But reflecting back, kind of like Commander Farrell did, I was stationed here back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and it was before it was called Sector Boston. It was Marine Safety Office Boston and Group Boston, and I was at the Marine Safety Office. I reported there as Ensign Benson, and a very unfortunate name to have, but fortunately only for 18 months. But I was the only female officer there at the Marine Safety Office, and there was one female enlisted petty officer. So there was just the two of us in an office of, I think, about 60 people or so. So fast forward, here we are, you know, in 2022, and I haven't counted them specifically, but most of our departments are at least at 1/3 women, if not more. So I think, I don't know if it's unique to being a woman, but maybe unique to being what Kailie brings to this role that I'm holding at the moment is I've really learned collaborative problem solving. I don't know if that's specifically female. I do know a lot of males who are very collaborative as well. But also one of the things I've really focused on as I've become more senior in the organization is paying particular attention to the difference between when you have to make a decision in a snap, when it needs to be rapid, when it needs to be decisive, and it needs to be your own and immediate, versus when there's time, the luxury of time to collaborate and to brainstorm and to afford contributions of the diverse mindset that I have on my team. And I found that that has paid dividends, especially as I look out at my team. And, you know, our goal as Coast Guard members theoretically should be that we're training our replacements. And so that's particularly how I approach, you know, this leadership role that I'm in.
Thank you. I think each of you have brought up this idea of collaboration, and I think you all work with surrounding communities to different degrees. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you approach that? We'll come around the other way this time, and Lisa, we'll start with you.
So I think, you know, obviously we have this balancing act, right? So our assets at Massport are an economic engine for the Commonwealth and the city of Boston and New England. And we try to balance our role as an economic engine with looking for opportunities to reduce the impacts we have on surrounding communities. And so, you know, it's a challenge, but we engage with our community partners in many ways. Some examples recently have to do with the green space that we're building out in East Boston. So many of you know I have this photo behind me of Pierce Park, an award-winning park. We have been collaborating with members of the community in East Boston on Pierce Park 2, which will add additional green space, as well as with the trustees of the reservations on Pierce Park 3. So in total, we had 37.5 acres of green space around the harbor, and those 2 additional parks will bring an additional 8 acres. But we've been engaged in a community process about what does the design look like for those parks, what's important. The community was very instrumental in helping to lay out the plans for Pierce Park 1. And so they have been providing us along the way the things that their needs that have evolved over time as the demographics of East Boston have changed, what's important to them, what's important to young families. And so we constantly engage in a process with them about how do we make these spaces better for our surrounding neighborhoods and communities.
Thank you, Lisa. Commander Farrell.
Collaboration is huge. So obviously down at the Navy Yard, we have several entities that we work with there. So between the Department of the Navy, City of Boston, and then the Park Service, it is definitely a collaborative relationship. And so, you know, as we gear up for some of the events we're looking at doing, it definitely has to include everybody and focus on everybody's end goals. And I definitely think that's an important relationship and a skill set to have. And even just in the sense of respect between organizations. So even things maybe don't impact people, but sharing, you know, the information that you do have just in the interest of being a good neighbor or anything else is super important. And so it's definitely something that goes through my mind every day in the sense of keeping those relationships healthy.
Thank you. Captain Benson.
Yes, just like the others, partnership is really woven into everything that we do on a daily basis. It's we can't do what we do without it, and we're very invested there. Just for a couple of examples off the top of my head, I would say, so every time the USS Constitution gets underway, she has a moving security zone. You know, we collaborate with our Navy partners in order to work out the logistics for what that looks like so that we can make sure that the vessel is safe while it's making its transit. Recently, the Massport and partners wrapped up the Dredging Project in Boston Harbor. Coast Guard is very involved, the environmental permitting and clearing the way for that to happen, plus maintaining communications to ensure that everybody's aware of what's happening with the dredging project at any given time, so that shipping can still be facilitated and ships can move in and out of the port. We meet regularly with, we have a host of committees. We have an area maritime security committee. We have an area committee, which is focused on environmental matters. The area maritime security committee, of course, is focused on security. We participate in a whole host of committees that are focused on numerous aspects of what happens here in the harbor. So we're all in. It's what we do, and it's expected of my team that it's priority number one.
Thank you. And Reverend Mariama, you started this, I think, in the beginning of today's conversation, talking about equity and inclusion and engaging and really involving people in process. You've got a lot of neighborhoods in the city dealing with a lot of issues. You want to talk a little bit more about some of that work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that so there's what I do around the harbor, and that really actually cuts across a number of different pieces of my role, both in the environment department and really looking at climate change and how we're responding to it, but also overseeing the parks department, which again, is a partner with many of the folks here as we work together on the harbor islands and other pieces of that. So, we are working really hard to make sure that our cabinet is not siloed, that we're working across, and then also trying to work across with other city agencies. But a few things that we have been looking at. So a lot of this is around how we design parks, how we make sure that particularly our waterfront parks are giving people equitable access to the open space. One of the things that people know is probably you've never probably been around me where I don't have my mock-up of Moakley Park. This is my favorite park and one of my big goals is to raise the $250 million that we need to make this park work. But one of the things I think is really important about it, that's it's really about not just protecting Dorchester and the city overall, but I think pretty intensely about Mary Ellen McCormick and Old Colony housing developments that are right behind that park. And I spent some time in New Orleans post-Katrina. I know what happens when low-income folks are not protected from natural disasters. It can lead to whole communities being displaced. In the case of New Orleans, many of those people never made their way back. So really thinking about how we are making our decisions about land and land use in ways that prioritize our most vulnerable residents. And that's, our core around the waterfront is really around these questions of protection from climate and from flooding. But we're also looking at other issues like heat islands that we have throughout the city. Thankfully, fewer of them are right close to our water because our water actually plays a mitigating impact to cool down some of the spaces that are right up against the waterfront. But you do have places in East Boston that are not too far from the waterfront, for instance, where people are experiencing heat islands. And as anybody who knows East Boston, you know that the way that housing is set up there, that very few people have backyards. And so open space is of a huge premium. And we really have to think about how do we make the parks that we work there double as both spaces that are protecting people from the current and future realities of climate change and flooding, and all the other times, the places like if you don't have a backyard, our parks are your backyard, and we need to make sure that they're accessible. We really think about how we make sure that there's culturally appropriate programming happening in the park. How are we making sure that everyone has access and feels comfortable? And we think about sort of like some of the recreational needs along the park. And then we're having that conversation in other places like the Seaport, where that wasn't really a neighborhood. That was an industrial zone. And so we've made a commitment that everybody in the city of Boston will be within 10 minutes walk of a park. Well, that means that if we're opening up new areas that were not previously residential, now we have to figure out how are we building new parks in those areas that match the kind of quality that we expect for everywhere in the city, especially since, in the Seaport, most of those areas are high rises. So it's, again, people don't have backyards. What we provide are really the spaces that people can interact in. And so we're thinking both about people in the neighborhoods, right? And how that's really, but we're also thinking about the fact that every single person in the city of Boston should see the water as part of their experience as a resident. I know that under Mayor Janey and continuing under Mayor Wu, we're also looking at things like, how are we making sure that every child in Boston Public School is able to swim? There is a painful legacy of the fact that for many of us who are descendants of slaves, there were rules that you could not teach slaves how to swim. And that was a control mechanism to make people afraid to run away, to make people afraid of the water. And unfortunately, many of those things have continued hundreds of years later. And so you have many populations of people who may have grown up right around the water, but the legacies of racism continue to make them afraid of being there. And so it's been great both to look at that from within the city, but also I've been blessed to be part of a group of women of color organizing around the harbor who've been really thinking about how do we destigmatize, demystify how folks can connect with the water. So I'm looking forward to some events. I'm also a scuba diver. There's not too many Black scuba divers. When people see me, my dad and I just came back from a scuba diving trip in the Turks and Caicos, and people are pretty surprised to see us, right? There are not that many folks that are known in that space and that are seen in that space, Black folks. And so I try to make sure that I talk all the time about the amazing things that I see. Now, I have to admit, this summer, I am definitely planning to go scuba diving in the harbor. I did learn to scuba dive in the Caribbean, and I've had a little bit of a hard time imagining myself jumping into Boston waters. But this is my home, and I love to dive enough that I've decided that I'm gonna wait till July. I follow the temperatures, right? You will not see me diving in the harbor in March, but when we get to July, really getting out there and seeing what's present. I love being under there. It is when I do it on vacation, it's like my first dive is my prayer time. It's so easy to connect with to God in there. And so I'm actually writing a book called Divine Diving, really talking about my own experience in diving. But I do think there's a real importance as we talk about who has access, making sure that there is appropriate public access and everybody's welcome. But there is another layer of work that we have to do, recognizing that there are a lot of historical racial tensions around how people have experienced the water. And so I think it's important, I try to be really public in my love of swimming and my love of the water and my regard for the access that is there and making sure that everyone feels safe going out.
That's great. Thank you, Mariama. We're going to talk about the TCI sometime. Did you dive the wall? Yeah. I want to take a minute to try to do a couple of specific questions for folks, and then we'll be opening it up to all of you to be submitting your questions on the Q&A. I'm going to start with Lisa. We're joined tonight by members of Mothers Out Front, particularly from East Boston, who've had a number of questions about air quality issues and at Massport, from flights as well as from vehicles coming in and out of the airport. Lisa, in addition to preparing for climate change impacts, what initiatives are you planning to address the reduction of CO2, and how can the public get involved or either get involved in helping or in tracking changes in emissions?
Sure. So great question from Mothers Out Front, and I know that they are strong advocates for the community of East Boston. I think many of you may know that last week Massport announced our roadmap to net zero, and that is a part of our aspiration to be a better neighbor to our surrounding communities. And that plan, frankly, is pretty aggressive. We are setting a goal to try to get to net zero by 2031. And it's a two-pronged approach. So we're trying to get to net zero by 2031 for emissions that we can control, where we can make an investment and reduce our emissions, everything we control to zero. And then we're going to be working with our airline partners, our ocean carrier partners, tenants, et cetera, to influence and enable how they get to net zero. I think the good news, Kathy, is we're not starting from scratch. You know, a lot of people have asked me 2031, the milestone you have to hit is 2050. So why are you trying to hit 2031? And I think it's because we do have this sense of responsibility to be a better neighbor. And so when people say, well, gee, how are you going to get there? I say, well, you know, for decades, Massport has tried to be a good environmental steward. We have a number of firsts. We're one of the first airports in the country to report on an annual basis our environmental impacts, and that is certainly a way that the community gets involved and understands what our emissions trajectory is. We do that each year. When I think about the current platform and the investments we're making today, we've invested significantly in our HOV strategy. We operate Logan Express services from Framingham, Braintree, Woburn. We just relaunched our Peabody Logan Express service to provide, frankly, a better product to the residents of the North Shore. The product that we had before wasn't in the greatest location. And so we've relocated that to the North Shore Mall as a part of our effort to increase the number of people that utilize public transportation, in this case, Logan Express. And we've also incented people to use those services. We've reduced the prices. We've made it more convenient to purchase tickets online. We continue to help subsidize the Silver Line with the 3 and free approach. So a number of investments that we're making that are already in place that we will build on as we reduce our own emissions to net zero by 2031 and simultaneously work with our business partners to enable them and incent them to reduce their footprint here in Boston.
That's terrific, thanks. And how about if the public wants to get involved in any way, shape, or form? Is there a community component to this at all?
Yeah, so I think there will be a couple of different ways. Obviously, each year through our EDR process, the community is involved. And then, you know, as we try to build out the implementation plan for this roadmap to net zero, we know we're going to have conversations with the community about what that looks like. I think one of the challenges for anyone who sets these kind of goals is how do you track these emissions? How do you report on it? And so that's part of our implementation plan that we're working through, how we will be able to say, if we made this investment in our central heating plant, what reductions would it enable? So that's all part of this implementation, our next phase.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Captain Benson, the Coast Guard was founded in Massachusetts, and you also are stewards of one of the country's oldest light station for a little bit. Can you talk a little bit, or I guess the question really is, does this history impact you or the way you think or about the way you do your job at all?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. You can't escape it, really. And, you know, it's a great honor for me to be here in Boston and to serve and to lead a contingent of Coast Guard members with this historic, you know, backdrop. The fact that in 1791, the first revenue cutter, the Massachusetts, operated here and out of Boston. And then fast forward, here we are in 2022, and later this year, we're going to start we will receive a first of 6 fast response cutters straight out of the shipyard. So it's an amazing spectrum of history. The Coast Guard's really comprised of a number of identities that came together over time, which kind of make up different facets of the mission sets that we've been assigned. We have the Revenue Cutter Service, of course, as I just mentioned, life-saving service, you know, which gives us our search and rescue history, our Bureau of Marine Inspection and Navigation, which gives us our commercial vessel inspection program that still, you know, is very important today. So just to name a few. So, you know, the Harbor Islands play a really important role in that. I'm a lover of Boston Lighthouse. It's a favorite of mine. I get calls and texts every time the light goes out. So I know its rhythm intimately. And it's just a really important marker and beacon representative, I think, of, you know, the good work that your Coast Guard has, you know, done across time and continues to do today.
Thank you. Commander Farrell, you are a new set of eyes on the harbor, running a very old ship. But have you brought any new program ideas to the Constitution and to your area?
So most of what I'm focusing on right now and some changes I'm trying to make really are kind of internal to the crew. But, you know, a lot of questions I've gotten recently since I assumed command is why is Constitution still relevant? And so I'm trying to really drive that home to the public and to the Navy as well. Kind of sometimes they ask is, you know, well, the reason Constitution was so successful in the War of 1812 is her captains ran gun drills. And they were able to put rounds out the barrel faster than their adversaries, and sometimes at twice as fast. So anytime you can do that, it makes you more proficient. We still run those types of drills in the Navy today. And even things as simple as you do a tour on board and we talk about the grog tub where sailors would have gotten their ration of whiskey or rum, you know, cut with water, and how the crew put fruit in that to help with vitamin deficiencies and to fight scurvy on board a ship. They had to pull into port to get those fruits and vegetables that they had on a ship. Or today we can do what we call an underway replenishment, where we actually pull up alongside an oiler and refuel at sea, as well as take on stores. And so, you know, during the pandemic, it was extra important because our ships were able to sustain operations for over 200 days without pulling into port. And we're one of the few countries in the world that can do that. And so, you know, and again, Constitution is being just accessible in that sense and trying to tie that story to the Navy of today. But I think it's just nice to focus on the fact that she was built here. And all those names that people love across the Boston Freedom Trail so much, like Paul Revere, have a tie to the ship. And so it just makes them interested to come and then to expand on that story. So we're looking to expand maybe some of the static displays and stuff we do on the pier as well, to talk a little bit more about the modern Navy and our purpose, and just to give people a little bit extra to come visit us. So, and I retract my last statement. We're over 11,000 visitors for the month because I just got today's numbers.
That's great. Thank you. We haven't talked a lot about kids yet. Mariama, you have a pretty exciting resume when it comes to engaging youth, educating them, involving them in understanding the civil rights movement, engaging them in activism. And I know you were thinking, I know we've talked a little bit about how we might get young people involved in the harbor and in the kinds of issues that you manage for the city. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I, in many ways, still consider myself a youth worker. That is the work that I did for a good chunk of my life. And I'm thankful as a pastor to continue being able to engage with young people, although I too really miss the amount of engagement we used to have when we were more in person. A lot has gone online, and it means I don't get to interact with young people as much as I used to. But I do try to spend, I tell my staff, like, I need to be with young people at least once a month. I would love for it to be once a week, so they're constantly trying to find me opportunities to, because I think that from my perspective, I think that when you work in climate change, it's important work, but it can be depressing work at times. Every time we get the reports, it feels like the next one is worse than the last. And it does, as hopeful as I try to be as an individual, when you really follow the science, it can be a bit overwhelming. And so I think the thing that from my perspective has given me the most hope is really seeing the way that young people have really gotten focused on this issue, really taken the helm of leadership. I don't believe the world would be where it is in terms of the kind of conversation we're having and the sense of urgency that we have. And we need more, but I think much of what we see in terms of people taking this issue seriously is because young people rose up and they challenged their parents and they talked to their grandparents and they marched in the street and they said, you know, we deserve a future. So, you know, I do have a lot of experience in working with young people, and I worked a lot with teenagers, which I loved. I did used to take them on a 2.5-week tour from Boston to New Orleans and back. And usually at the completion of every one of those, I said, why am I doing this anymore? Because they never went to sleep when I told them to. And someone always ended up with like toothpaste in their hair, and like, you told people like not to fall in love. These relationships never work out, but they always did anyway. But at the end of the day, I think, particularly from my perspective, they brought a level of creativity. and they were willing to ask tough questions. And I saw a lot less fear to try to figure out, how do we do things that are really hard, but really important to do. So I think from my perspective, if we really actually want to be successful on hard, challenging issues, we need young people at the table. We need them to keep us honest. We need them to remind us why we're doing it. We need them to bring a level of creativity and courage that, you know, sometimes it does wear down over time, and you need that fresh energy to bring that. And then I think the other thing is, you know, I believe strongly that I made a few mistakes in my life, and I like the young people that come behind me. They're still going to have to make mistakes. I'm hoping that I can share my own experience so they can at least make new mistakes, so that humanity can move forward, and that they don't have to always experience some of the things that we've attempted and that have just like really not worked out. So, you know, I think from my own perspective and my own historical and cultural perspective, I believe in the importance of intergenerational work. And sometimes get a little disappointed that we have like young people over here and adults over here, and they're like talking across divides. And I'm like, to really get this right, we actually need to figure out ways to be sitting at these tables together, to bring the assets that each of us have, because I think those things make up the full picture. So I had a really great, interesting conversation with a young woman today who's in her senior year at UMass Boston in the environmental studies department. I told her she needs a job. She's a great one. So if we don't take her at the city, I hope somebody else will hire her. She was fascinating and exciting and talking about environmental justice and community organizing. And I need that on a regular basis when, you know, I think we all have to deal with a little bit of bureaucracy, and sometimes it wears down on your soul a bit. And for me, being around young people is a crucial part of keeping my own energy to do the work that I know I feel called to do.
All right, we're going to, we've got some great questions from the audience. Kanan from Eastie. To what extent do you feel as women you're expected to be more caring and compassionate than a man would be in the same position? How do you care for those who need that extra care, such as low-income folks and people of color in coastal neighborhoods in the vicinity of an international airport experiencing air pollution, noise, and traffic congestion? We have a theme tonight. Who wants to take that one first? Does anybody feel like you're being expected to be more caring and compassionate as a woman? And how do you address that?
I'll take this. Or I think maybe there is an expectation, but I actually kind of embrace it. I kind of, my leadership style, and kind of when I've been asked this question a lot lately, and what makes an effective leader is to be true to yourself. And I am a compassionate person by nature. So I definitely think that shines through in my leadership style. Now that doesn't mean when I have to be strict, I am not. I definitely think that I can do that as well, and it's balanced. But you know, during COVID, I think was the prime example. The Navy didn't stop our mission during COVID, and my husband and I were both serving on active duty, still going to work every day. And there were days I had to leave to go home and do virtual kindergarten. And I would intentionally leave during meal hours when I had the biggest line of people that I had to walk through so they could see me leaving. So they knew it wasn't something they had to do alone. I was doing it as well, and we were kind of all in it together in that sense, and you know what we were doing. And so I think sometimes maybe people do expect it, but the flip side then is I actually am more ashamed of people when they expect it, and a woman is not that way. So because it fits my style doesn't mean that's how everyone is, and I think it's just the individual and how we all work.
That's great. Lisa, did you want to add something to that?
No, I think Commander Farrell's points I completely concur with.
Anybody else want to add anything to that, Mariama or Kailie?
I do think we're held to a higher standard, but quite frankly, I think often it's the standard we should all be held accountable to. So I'm not gonna do less than that. I think, you know, I got to figure out how to help the men catch up, because sometimes they just haven't been trained properly. And, you know, so I do think the idea that we care about our people and we're thinking about them as people and not just workers is how all people should lead.
Thank you. Very specific question about the USS Constitution. Will she sail on her own this year is the question.
The answer is not this year, but we do have 7 turnarounds planned, kind of in conjunction with what it's been like the past few years, with a tug that'll take us out for those harbor cruises and turnarounds. But we are looking at a plan to potentially sail her in the next 2 to 4 years under her own power. And it does take some time. It takes about 2 years to get that plan in place to actually sail her under her own power. So we're starting to look at the discussion and what the right time would be, but we have so many great commemoration and celebrations coming up. One of those, hopefully we'll see Constitution sail under her own power.
Thank you. Okay, Lisa. Lisa mentioned net zero. Net zero means carbon emissions here plus compensation elsewhere like tree planting. Is zero emissions, i.e. emitting no carbon at all, is it really a practical goal?
So I guess I'll just reiterate what I said before, right? So if we look at what the standards are being set, the standards say, the goals that have been set is we have to get to net zero by 2050, right? So that is the target that have been set by, the US or the Paris Climate Accord is the target that's been set at the state, and there are various federal levels of net zero that have been set as well. And so, for us, as we thought about that, we said, well, gee, is there something we could do that would get us there faster? And so, we have a set of initiatives about investing in greater energy efficiency and conservation in our facilities, upgrading the equipment that we use, pursuing and utilizing clean and renewable energy, continuing to invest in sustainable ground transportation. And so if we invest in those things, we'll be able to get most of the way there to net zero by 2031. But because all the technologies won't be ready, because there may not be enough supply of sustainable fuels, and because we do have to have resilient operations, we may have to rely on some offsets if we're going to truly be able to get to net zero. And so that is kind of the path, right? We invest in these key pathways. We might have to do some offsets until all of these technologies are there. I think the good news is, and Kathy, you asked me earlier, there are opportunities to collaborate with the community. When I asked the consultants that helped us, VHB, with this plan, so, lots of people talk about offsets. What does that mean? And they said, there are a lot of great opportunities to invest in offsets that have local impacts. And so that if we need to use them by 2031, that will be a part of the plan, is how can we have some local impact as opposed to investing in these things that benefit other places. So this is, I know lots of people want to see things faster or more, but I think what I would say is this is a big commitment on our part. It's going to involve a significant investment. It's going to take a lot of work. This plan has a lot of details that has to be fleshed out. And we have to work with our business partners to make sure that they are meeting the goals and the deadlines that have been set for them and doing all we can to try to accelerate that. So it's really a two-pronged approach. That answers the question.
Thank you. That's great. Vincent asked about what the challenges are, the ongoing challenges to Boston Harbor's water quality these days. I don't know, Mariama or Captain Benson? Anybody want to talk about CSOs or non-point source or?
I know a little bit about sort of what's the ongoing work of the MWRA, because that's how we build, we talk with MWRA and we talk to BWSC, so the Mass Water Resource Authority and the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. I think there's a lot of ongoing monitoring, but I think that from what I sort of most know is that we think we're doing a mostly good job. There are some things that continue to be a challenge in terms of toxins that enter our system, and how are we paying attention to sort of staying on top of the kinds of things that are being added and protecting our water. But yeah, so I'm not a water expert, but I do pay attention and know that we have some strong teams of folks who are working pretty consistently. But I could hand it over to Captain Benson, because I'm sure she can speak more to it.
I'm also not a water quality expert, but so that's not a role that we at the Coast Guard office play. We don't do water quality monitoring per se, but what we do is I have a team of pollution responders, and so we are very very invested in investigating. Well, first we need a notification that something's happened. And we get them routinely, sheens spotted, etc. And we send out a response team to go and investigate what's happened, whether oil or chemicals have entered the navigable waterway. And then if that's happened, there are a host of steps that occur in order to effect a cleanup, engage with partners, and if we can find a responsible party to hold them accountable, that can be very challenging, of course, in a busy harbor, but it's something, pollution response is one of the many missions that we perform.
Thank you. Commander Farrell, Richard would like to know if there was an inkling of a glimmer of a thought back in 1997 about whether you would ever be personally involved with the Constitution. And given that you are, as I said earlier, a fresh set of eyes, has anything about the Navy Yard or the ship really particularly grabbed your attention already?
So I don't think there's any way when that picture was taken, I would have ever predicted that my career path would have led me here. I've spent, I've been in the Navy for 18 years, and I've spent every sea tour on a Ticonderoga guided missile cruiser. And so to then be entrusted with a ship that's 225 years old is definitely not something that I predicted I was going to be doing, but I'm very fortunate that I was entrusted with this position, and I'm humbled by the opportunity to do that. And so yeah, even though I've been here a short time, I think one, with the Navy Yard, I just love the amount of foot traffic that comes through there. A lot of where the Navy is not always necessarily situated in a city. And so we don't get to kind of see that and experience that. And so people walking through is always really great. And then the other thing is in general, I kind of alluded to this earlier, I underestimated a little bit the media attention that was going to come with my position. But it really is apparent how much the country loves the ship. She say she's America's ship of state, and that truly is a title she has earned. And I think it's evident in how many times the public has saved her as well when you go back through her history. And you look at things like the pennies campaign, where school children, threw in their pennies to save the ship and understood the importance of keeping her around. And so every time I just have a group of kids specifically on board, and I get to talk to them and share the stories of the ship and the history, and kind of open their eyes to the importance and significance of where they're standing, and how it's a battleground where people gave their lives to establish our government and our freedoms that we have today. It's a job that I am thankful and lucky and privileged to have to serve my country.
Thank you, Commander. Here's a popular question, Reverend Mariama. Will the Long Island Bridge be reconstructed, and will Long Island once again be providing services to the city?
Well, that is a bit of a legal issue, so I can't speak openly, but I will say that the city of Boston is very committed to making Long Island open and available. Not all cities and towns who are connected to Long Island share that same mission. And that is all I can say on that matter.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions that I'd love for each of you to take a stab at. What have you been most proud of in your career so far? We'll start with Captain Benson. Go around the circle.
That's a great question. And I've gotten to do a lot of really cool things across my Coast Guard career. I've got to live in a lot of awesome locations, including 3 overseas tours. I've got to serve with a lot of fantastic folks. I would say the thing that I'm most proud of, and maybe it's because it's the most recent prior to me arriving here in Boston, is my last job. I was at Coast Guard headquarters, and I was in charge of the Coast Guard wide emergency management program. And it was an awesome, it was ripe for the picking, because when I arrived there, it was called something else. It was sort of an outdated title for the program that didn't really align with what's happening across states and locals and private industry, as far as what emergency management is, what it's called, what's the vocabulary, what are we doing for our communities and our private entities in order to make sure that we are resilient and that we are working on making sure that we are ready to respond to any crisis, for whether it's for continuity of government or continuity of business reasons. So I was able to work with, I had a great team there, as I do here. And we, within a 3-year time frame, executed a massive programmatic transformation in a really rapid fire manner, which, as many of you know, most organizations have their fair share of red tape, and Coast Guard headquarters is not unique in that. So getting things passed through clearance and approval processes can often be sluggish, might be a word I would use there. Anyway, we were able to undertake that mission and transformed our program. And now we have the Office of Emergency Management, and we have that cascaded down to the field level. And we have a very vibrant emergency management office here at the field level, at the port level, which I'm super proud of, because it just raised the level of pride for all of the folks across the Coast Guard who were, many of the missions of the Coast Guard are facets of emergency management, if you wanted to really be technical about it, even though we don't call it that. But the emergency management program per se, the folks that work in it day in and day out, dedicated to making sure that not only is the Coast Guard ready, but our partners, our port partners, our industry partners, and our work with other levels of government, that we're ready to respond to a crisis, the level of pride that it brought to them. I'm super proud of that.
That's fantastic. Lisa, Wieland.
So I think one of the things I'm most proud of, I can't take full credit for. There was a coalition that was put together to try to advance the modernization of Conley Terminal, which included the hundreds of millions of dollars we needed to dredge the harbor. It was the money that was needed to invest in deeper berths and new cranes at Conley. And when we started out on that journey, it was a dream. Massport did not have the money to invest. And I knew the livelihoods of so many people were dependent upon us making these critical infrastructure investments. And so we put together a coalition. Boston Harbor Now participated. Other harbor advocacy participants were a part of that coalition. Labor, the men and women of the port stepped up. Businesses, importers and exporters across New England. We went to our federal partners, our federal delegation, and said we need some help with funding. We went to the Baker-Polito administration and the state legislature, and they were all in. And so watching those cranes sail into Boston Harbor last summer was amazing. And it was truly a proud moment when I thought about the collective efforts of everyone to ensure the future of this port. And the economic value it provides to people was truly one of the highlights, and something that I think many people can be proud of and sharing.
You guys are making me feel really good. It's nice to live vicariously. So Reverend Mariama.
I think one of the things I'm maybe most proud of in this particular role, so I think obviously the passing of our building emissions performance standard, that was a pretty big deal, and we've done something that I think is being appreciated around the country. Recently, our environment commissioner got the opportunity to present a little bit about it at a meeting with the White House, in which they're trying to get other cities and towns to sort of look at that. So that was pretty exciting. But I think probably the thing I'm most excited about is that in May, we will launch a green jobs program built on a model from Philadelphia, which focuses on bringing in underemployed and unemployed young adults, 18 to 30, with a particular emphasis on folks who are coming or returning citizens from our prison system, not exclusively, but we want to make sure that people have a direct access to some of the jobs in the green sector. We're going to be focusing a lot on urban forestry because we struggle to fill some of our urban forestry positions, particularly because people who love trees often live in more rural places and don't necessarily live in Boston, and Boston has a residency requirement. But I'm really excited to see young folks who grew up in our city, many of whom probably never thought about urban forestry as an option, to be able to learn. So I'm excited because I've signed up. I'm going to get to do the chainsaw training. They're going to have a 3-day training around how to use a chainsaw, and I'm going to be out there with them learning how to use a chainsaw. It's like one of my dreams to do that. But I would love if folks have ideas about also water-based careers in the green sector, please let us know. This year we're starting with 30 young people, but our goal is to get to where Philadelphia is, which is to graduate at least 120 young people a year in lots of different sectors, urban forestry, park rangers. So we have reached out to the Forest Service, but I probably need to put in a call to the National Park Service and talk to them about what we're doing to train those young people. They'll be learning about how we're controlling the geese population in the fens and other things like that I think might be also useful. We're looking at, building operators and all sorts of other different pieces where we've heard from folks, we want to go green and we don't have the workers to fill that. And so that is an exciting opportunity to match parts of our community that have been unemployed and underemployed for the whole time I was growing up, ever since I remember, with exciting new job possibilities that put them on track for not just like any old kind of job that will pay the rent, but the kinds of careers that they can grow into and raise a family and really uplift their communities on. So that's, I've been working on that. I got excited about it last year and we did some community meetings and saw some programs. And so I'm really excited that we'll be launching that in mid-May.
That's great. Thank you.
Reverend Mariama, I want to sign up for your chainsaw training.
Yes, you should come.
I'm all in.
Women's chainsaw picture with all of us with our chainsaws. It's like, I think
all right, we're all invited.
Ready for that. So if any other women on this call want to learn how to use a chain, I'm offering my tree warden might tell me, what are you doing? But I feel like it's a key skill and we need to know how to prune our trees. So Captain Benson, as soon as I get those dates, I'll be sending you an email.
I also want to offer to you, let me know when you're going to go scuba diving in Boston Harbor. We'll give you a safety zone.
All right. I'll take you up on that too.
We're all in. We want to make sure you're safe.
Commander,
it's a busy
Farrell,
harbor.
This is good. We're finally getting conversational in the last moments of the event, but that's great. We'll have to do this again.
Chainsaw.
Commander Farrell, you have all of about 30 seconds to give us the greatest accomplishment of your career.
So I'll go a little more personal. I think I'm just very proud of my husband and I for both being able to make 20 years in the Navy happen, and figuring that out as a team and doing it together and supporting each other to both achieve our own career goals, because we couldn't have done it without each other.
Congratulations and thank you. And I'm turning it back to Liza.
Thank you so much. What a great conversation, y'all. So inspired tonight. I would like to just take a moment to thank all of you for tonight's wonderful program. Special thanks going out right now to Kathy Abbott. We could have asked you a million questions as well, and I think it was so humble of you to be the moderator tonight. So let's grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine sometime so I can ask you questions. But thanks to Kathy Abbott for moderating tonight and to each of our incredible panelists for joining us for this evening of Women on the Waterfront. Captain Kailie Benson, the commander of the USS Coast Guard Sector Boston, Commander Billie Farrell, commanding officer of the USS Constitution, Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space for the City of Boston, and Lisa Wieland, Chief Executive Officer of Massport. It has been a great night. It has been a night that I hope has put Boston Harbor and the harbor communities and its amazing people in the hearts of all of you who have been listening tonight. You have been blessed to hear from amazing people who are caring for the harbor and harbor communities things that they are doing now. And it's been clear that they've been looking to the past and taking sources of inspiration from what's come before, tackling what's on the ground here today with an eye towards shaping the way forward. These are amazing women who are in the job of doing this right now. But each of you out there who are watching us tonight, well, we all play a role in the health and wellness of our community, of our harbor, and of each other. Please, as you go out tonight, think about the roles each of you can play in taking care of ourselves and our community. If you'd like to further help us commemorate our very special park anniversary, please join us for upcoming harbor anniversary events. And there's 2 on the horizon. One is another program called Revolutionary Harbor Shipwrecks. A live conversations with a Massachusetts Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources researcher, and that's going to be on April 13th. You can check it out in the chat. There's a link there for you. In addition, I do want to let you know that May 21st marks opening day for the Boston Harbor Islands. Get down there to Long Wharf, get your ferry ticket, get on a ferry, and make your way out to George's or Spectacle Island. We hope to see you there. You can find the links to all of these things again in the chat. And to everybody, may you have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thanks, Liza.